What if the key to a lighter, freer life was not found in striving or achieving, but in stepping back and simply observing? In a world that urges us to run faster, worry more, and seek answers outside ourselves, a quiet voice from the 16th century calls us inward. Michel de Montaigne, a French nobleman turned philosopher, lived through plague, war, and loss. Yet rather than retreat into despair, he chose to turn the mirror toward himself. In a tower lined with books, he wrote with startling honesty, not to teach others but to understand his own mind. He asked, what does it mean to live, to die, to be human, flawed and free? His essays shimmer with a rare kind of wisdom, gentle, grounded, and enduring. He reminds us that to live well, we must first learn to befriend our own nature, that we find peace not by escaping uncertainty, but by learning to sit beside it. In this video, we'll trace 5 of Montaigne's most luminous ideas, each one a lantern to help illuminate your path through anxiety, distraction, and self-doubt. If your soul is weary and your thoughts restless, stay with me. Let's begin where Montaigne began, with ourselves. Michel de Montaigne was not interested in appearing wise. He was interested in being human. While the thinkers of his time often wore the robes of certainty and authority, Montaigne laid bare his doubts, his fears, and his contradictions. His writings are not polished monuments to perfection, they are warm, wandering conversations with the self. One of Montaigne's most radical insights was this: to understand humanity, one must begin with oneself. Every man bears the whole stamp of the human condition, he wrote. In other words, we are not isolated enigmas, we are mirrors of each other. Our private thoughts, our silent worries, our strange habits, these are not evidence of our unworthiness, but of our shared nature. In a culture obsessed with optimization, perfection, and constant self-improvement, this is a deeply subversive idea. Montaigne reminds us that the goal is not to become perfect, but to become honest, to stop pretending we are finished, flawless, or separate from others, to see ourselves as part of the great, messy, beautiful experiment that is being alive. He did not flinch from his flaws. He wrote openly about his laziness, his digestive issues, his fear of doctors, his clumsiness in conversation. He made no attempt to disguise his limitations. Instead, he invited them in as part of the full experience of being. He even joked about his own forgetfulness, admitting that he would sometimes forget the name of the person standing right in front of him. "If I am sometimes a different man," he said, "so be it. I am always truly myself." This kind of self-acceptance is not indulgent, it's courageous. It means looking at ourselves without the harsh lens of judgment and without the anxious need to justify or explain. It means recognizing that being human is not a flaw to be corrected, but a truth to be embraced. But Montaigne didn't stop at understanding himself. He used that understanding to create compassion for others. "If I am weak," he reasoned, "so are you. If I am lost sometimes, then so is everyone else." There is no us and them in Montaigne's world. There is only we, all trying, all stumbling, all searching for peace. How freeing this is if we let it be, to stop measuring ourselves by impossible standards, to let go of the illusion that we must always be productive, composed, or admirable. What if instead we measured ourselves by our willingness to be real, by our capacity to sit with our imperfections and still find joy? The practice, then, is not self-improvement, it is self-return. Returning to the simple truth of what we are, creatures of contradiction, capable of tenderness and fear, wisdom and foolishness, clarity and confusion, often all in a single day. And in that return, we find not shame, but freedom. The freedom to live as we are, the freedom to speak without artifice, to relate without pretense, to rest without guilt. When we stop warring with ourselves, the world becomes less of a battlefield and more of a home. So Montaigne's first lesson is not to be better, but to be whole, to embrace the strange, shifting terrain of the self. Not as a problem to be solved, but as a landscape to be explored. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are simply human, and that, Montaigne assures us, is more than enough. Death, so often feared, avoided, and pushed into the shadows, was, for Montaigne, the gateway to life. In one of his most striking declarations, he writes, "To philosophize is to learn how to die." At first glance, this sounds grim, even morbid, but if we linger with the thought, as Montaigne would have, we begin to see its quiet radiance. He does not mean we should obsess over death or romanticize it. He means that when we confront the inevitability of our end, we loosen the grip of fear that quietly shapes our lives. We stop running from shadows and begin walking toward the light of what truly matters. Montaigne lived in a time of constant upheaval. War, disease, and early death were everyday realities. He lost close friends, witnessed political executions, and nearly died himself after a fall from his horse. Yet rather than grow bitter or detached, he used these experiences as a kind of mirror, one that reflected back the preciousness of time, the fragility of life, and the deep beauty found in simply being here. Most of us live as though we have infinite tomorrows. We postpone peace, we delay joy, we hold back words of love, waiting for a perfect moment that may never come. But Montaigne reminds us, every breath is a vanishing thing. Each moment passes through our hands like water. If we don't learn how to be present with our impermanence, we miss the miracle of being alive at all. To learn how to die, then, is to learn how to live without clinging, without needing to control everything, without pretending that we are exempt from nature's law. Montaigne encourages us to walk beside death, not in fear, but with familiarity, like an old companion we have made peace with. And in doing so, we find strange liberation. Suddenly, the small irritations of life lose their sharpness. The rush to impress, to accumulate, to outshine, it all softens. What remains is clarity, the sun on our skin, a shared glance, a piece of bread, a laugh that rises unexpectedly. These are the treasures Montaigne invites us to notice, not the grand, but the grounded. He also reminds us that preparing for death is not about dramatics. It is not about being fearless or heroic. It is about practice, quiet, daily practice, accepting endings in small ways, the end of a day, the changing of seasons, the gentle goodbye in a conversation. Each is a rehearsal for the final letting go, and in each there is the chance to deepen our presence. To live in awareness of death is not to diminish life, it is to enlarge it. It stretches the soul beyond its anxious confines and invites us to dwell more deeply in now. As Montaigne puts it, the utility of living consists not in the length of days, but in the use we make of them. A short life well lived, he says, is far greater than a long one wasted in distraction and dread. So let us not wait for tragedy to awaken us. Let us, instead, wake ourselves gently with the wisdom of this truth. We are passing through. And that is not a curse, it is a call to presence, a call to simplicity, a call to gratitude. When we learn how to die, we no longer grip life with desperation, we hold it with reverence. And in that gentle holding, we begin, at last, to truly live. Montaigne did not seek glory in distant lands or acclaim in crowded halls. His wisdom was not forged in battles or palaces, but in gardens, in quiet rooms, and in the humble rhythm of daily life. For him, philosophy was not an escape from the world, it was a way to dwell more deeply within it. In a time when ambition often meant striving upward, toward greatness, toward legacy, Montaigne turned inward and downward, into the simple and the small. He reminds us, with gentle insistence, that happiness is not hidden in extraordinary experiences. It lives instead in the ordinary ones we so often overlook. He writes, "The most ordinary things, the ones we overlook every day, are the most worthy of our attention." This is not a retreat from meaning, it is a return to it, a rediscovery of the sacred in the simplest of gestures, pouring wine, petting a cat, watching the fire burn low. To Montaigne, these small acts were not distractions from philosophy, they were philosophy. In the crackling of the fire, he heard the crackling of time. In the pleasure of a good meal, he found the reminder that joy need not be postponed or earned. It could be tasted now. This view runs counter to much of how we are taught to live. We chase peaks, promotions, milestones, applause, believing that happiness is waiting on some higher rung. But Montaigne dismantles this illusion with quiet clarity. Joy, he says, is not a prize to be won. It is a current, always flowing, if only we would slow down enough to step into it. He paid close attention to the body, to sensation, to the moment. He did not shame himself for enjoying comfort or laughter. He saw that these things, when fully inhabited, brought us closer to life's essence, not further from it. This attention to the ordinary is also a form of resistance, a refusal to let anxiety dictate the tempo of our days. In Montaigne's time, just as in ours, the world was full of unrest. But rather than obsess over things beyond his control, he chose to master his gaze, to bring it home, to the smell of ink on the page, to the sound of wind in the trees, to the familiar touch of bread in the hand. It is in this turning of the gaze that joy reveals itself, not as excitement or elation, but as ease, as a quiet yes to the present moment. And in the background of this philosophy is gratitude, not loud or performative, but soft and lived. Montaigne does not say, "Be grateful." He shows us how gratitude arises naturally when we are attentive, when we stop rushing past the very things that are feeding us. There is a kind of spiritual humility in this stance, the willingness to say that today, without fanfare, without triumph, without perfection, is still enough, that this breath, this cup, this moment, undramatic as it may be, is already whole. In a world that constantly urges us to seek more, Montaigne urges us to see more, to see again what we've seen 1,000 times and finally realize its beauty. So let us remember, happiness is not hiding in the future or buried in achievement. It is stitched into the fabric of the now, waiting patiently in the quiet corners of our lives. Look closely. The ordinary is not empty. It is full and it is luminous. There is a kind of silence that only comes when the noise of the world fades, not outside, but within. This, Montaigne believed, is where freedom lives. Not in isolating ourselves from others, but in returning to the quiet sovereignty of our own mind. Montaigne knew well the tug of public life, the weight of opinion, the fickleness of reputation. He served as mayor, diplomat, and nobleman. He was praised and criticized, admired and misunderstood. And yet, in all of this, he began to see that relying on the world for peace was like chasing the wind. The moment you grasp it, it slips away. So he turned, again and again, to the sanctuary of his own inner life. A man who fears suffering, he wrote, is already suffering from what he fears. How much of our unrest, he asks, comes not from what actually happens, but from our anticipation of it, from our habit of outsourcing peace to things we cannot control, approval, status, outcomes. To cultivate inner independence is not to reject connection, but to loosen the need for validation. It is to remain rooted while the world sways. Montaigne called this retreating into the self, but he did not mean withdrawal from the world. He meant creating a space within ourselves where the mind can rest unbothered, even as storms gather outside. In that space, we discover that we are more resilient than we thought, not because we are invincible, but because we have stopped expecting life to protect us from discomfort. We begin to trust that we can endure what comes, and more importantly, that we can choose how we respond. This independence is not pride, it is clarity. It does not isolate us, it makes us more available. When we are not constantly scanning others for affirmation, we can actually listen. When we are not consumed by our image, we can be present. When we are anchored in ourselves, we are less easily shaken. Montaigne practiced this not in grand ways, but in quiet ones. He journaled, he read slowly. He spent hours alone in his library tower, not to escape people, but to find himself among them more fully. He called this the back shop of the soul, a private room where no one else may enter, a space we furnish with our own thoughts, values, and reflections. Modern life rarely grants us such spaces. Our attention is pulled outward. Notifications, opinions, headlines, and expectations press in on all sides. But Montaigne reminds us, no matter how loud the world becomes, there is always the possibility of a return, a gentle turning inward, where silence is not empty but alive. And so, cultivating inner independence is an act of quiet rebellion. It is saying, I will not let the noise of others drown out the sound of my own being. I will not be blown about by every passing wind. I will root myself in something deeper. We do not need to live in a tower to find this stillness. It begins with small acts, sitting without distraction, walking without purpose, observing without judgment. In those moments, we begin to reclaim a space the world cannot touch. And from that space, something beautiful emerges. Not cold detachment, but warm clarity. A steadiness that allows us to love more freely, act more honestly, and live more gently. Because when we are no longer dependent on the world for our sense of self, we are finally free to meet it, with openness, with presence, and with peace. There is a peculiar kind of grace in a person who can laugh at themselves, not mockery, not self-contempt, but a light-heartedness born from wisdom. Michel de Montaigne possessed this rare gift. In his writings, we find not the voice of a stern philosopher preaching from on high, but that of a wry, self-aware soul who chuckles at his own contradictions, quirks, and confusions. To study philosophy, he wrote, is nothing but to prepare oneself to die and to live at ease. And part of living at ease, he believed, was the ability to see oneself clearly, without the fog of ego or the weight of self-importance. He confessed freely to his forgetfulness, his awkwardness, his bodily ailments. He admitted that he often lost his train of thought, that his memory was treacherous, that he sometimes rambled without conclusion. And rather than conceal these things, he offered them openly, as if to say, "See, I am no different than you." There is something deeply disarming about this honesty. In a world where we are trained to posture, to perfect, to perform, Montaigne's self-deprecating voice invites us to exhale. He shows us that to be human is not a failing. It's a comedy, a gentle, beautiful absurdity, and the sooner we learn to laugh with it, the freer we become. This is not cynicism, it is humility. And humility, for Montaigne, was not self-punishment, it was a form of liberation. When we no longer need to appear flawless, we are no longer trapped by the exhausting performance of perfection. We can stumble, misspeak, change our minds, and even contradict ourselves, and still be whole. Humor for Montaigne was a kind of spiritual solvent. It softened the rigidity of pride. It loosened the grip of fear. It helped him step back from the anxious drama of the self and see life from a wider, kinder perspective. It was a way to let the soul breathe. He often compared life to a play, and in this play, we are all actors fumbling through our roles. We forget our lines. We bump into the furniture. But the audience, if it is wise, doesn't scorn us. It smiles, because it knows this is the point: to try, to err, to laugh, and to continue. In Montaigne's world, laughter is a sign not of weakness, but of wisdom. It shows that we are not taking ourselves too seriously, because we understand that no one else is either. And once we accept our own ridiculousness, we become more forgiving of others. Their flaws, too, become familiar, their mistakes, reflections of our own. There is a quiet dignity in this approach, not the dignity of armor, but of openness. A softness that says, I am not perfect, and I do not need to be. I am strange, forgetful, fragile, and that is enough. This kind of self-laughter is also protective. It shields us from the sharpness of shame. When we can laugh at our own stumbles, they lose their sting. When we can smile at our awkwardness, it no longer has power over us. And so, Montaigne teaches us the art of taking ourselves seriously enough, but never too much. He invites us to drop the mask, to step out of the spotlight, and to enjoy the dance of being human in all its imperfect rhythm. So the next time you falter, fumble, or feel foolish, smile. You are in good company. You are walking the same path as Montaigne and countless others who chose to laugh not in mockery, but in mercy. In the end, perhaps laughter is the sound of the soul remembering it was never meant to be flawless, only free. And so we arrive at the quiet heart of Montaigne's philosophy. Not a final answer, but a tender invitation to worry less and to live more, not by fixing life, but by softening into it. Across his essays, Montaigne does not offer commandments or grand systems. He offers something far more radical: companionship, a voice that walks beside us rather than ahead of us, a reminder that the work of life is not to transcend our humanity, but to return to it with kindness. He shows us that peace begins not in mastery, but in acceptance, that the fear of death can be eased not by denial, but by intimacy. That joy lives not in the distant or the dramatic, but in the worn pages of our daily routines. That true strength lies not in control, but in the cultivation of an inner steadiness, and that, above all, we become lighter when we learn to laugh at ourselves, when we allow our flaws to be part of the story, not a stain on it. In a time like ours, when so much demands our attention, when every voice seems to pull us in a different direction, Montaigne offers a path not forward, but inward. A path that leads us not to a different life, but to a deeper one. He does not promise certainty, he promises presence. He does not promise perfection, he promises possibility. So as we step away from this exploration, may we take with us not just Montaigne's words, but his way of seeing, a gaze that is gentle, curious, and honest, a gaze that meets life not with clenched fists, but with open hands. Let us worry less, not because the world is safe or simple, but because we have chosen to meet it with understanding rather than resistance. Let us live more, not in frantic pursuit, but in quiet wonder. And let us remember that philosophy is not found only in books or towers or essays, but in how we wash the dishes, how we speak to a stranger, how we sit with ourselves in the silence of the evening. As Montaigne might say, return to yourself, not because you are the answer, but because you are the beginning.